Thank you for joining us at Search Influence for this great session today, Marketing Data, Dashboards, and Decisions. We're going to go ahead and get started so that we can deliver on our promise of a 30-minute session and get you back to your priorities for the day. Today's session is a 2 of 3-part series to help education marketers plan, track, and earn buy-in for your marketing strategy. In our last session, we covered creating a student-centric journey rooted in the marketing funnel, and that recording is now available to all registrants of this session. Today, we're going to be covering an especially hot topic in education, one that I'm particularly passionate about. We're going to discuss how you can pull together disparate data from multiple sources into a dashboard that drives decision-making. And then in January, we'll kick off the new year with a session about internal working relationships and how to demonstrate and sell your ideas to your stakeholders. You're automatically registered for the next session since you registered for this one, and so you'll receive an email with a link to join ahead of the session. Just a quick brief introduction. I'm Allison Zarang, the Accounts Director here at Search Influence. Search Influence is a digital marketing and advertising agency. We have a 16-year history of results-focused digital marketing. We were founded in 2006 with a focus on search engine optimization. That's really kind of where we started. We've grown since then to support our clients at all stages of the prospect's journey while maintaining our focus on delivering best-in-class SEO strategies. We have a particular niche in education. We are a UPCEA corporate member, and we've spoken at a handful of their conferences as recently as last week. And we've also spoken at other conferences over the years, including the AMA Symposium for Higher Education. So today's session is going to feature some anecdotes, examples, and insights, particularly from one of our long-standing higher education client relationships, the Tulane School of Professional Advancement. We started our partnership with Tulane SOPA, as they're called, as their marketing partner in 2017. And together with the Assistant Dean, Krista Payne, we've shared many of the insights we're going to share with you today in other settings, like at conferences, and we're really excited for you to get to hear them as well. Today, we're going to jump right into the trouble with all of that data and then dig into how you can get to the big picture and solve what we find are 2 really common challenges with data analytics in higher education. We'll talk briefly about tools and platforms that can help you get your data aggregated, and then the real value of this presentation, real-life examples of how we've used that data to inform strategic decisions for a quickly growing and transforming school. Lastly, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A planned at the end. During the session, you feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat, and my colleague Shira Pinsker is going to moderate and gather those questions for discussion at the end. So first, the trouble with all that data. When it comes to data and reporting and understanding data and reporting, there are a few common challenges that we see in universities and higher ed institutions. The first are silos within the university. For example, marketing usually owns the website or placing media buys and those sorts of tasks and projects, but they often don't have access or insight into the enrollment CRM, and vice versa. The enrollment side doesn't necessarily understand marketing. Overall, what we've found is that there isn't a shared language between the two, and that leads to a lack of sharing and access to data that can really tell us important stories and have a great impact on recruitment. Second is data in disparate systems. There is simply too much data, and it's incredibly time-consuming to collect and understand, much less piece it together for any actionable insights that can really make a difference. And third, there is largely an inability or a challenge stringing together information about one prospect all the way through the funnel, or to even understand your funnel end-to-end. As we began our partnership with Tulane SOPA as their marketing partner in 2017, for both the marketing and the admissions side, reporting was painstaking. It was very time-consuming. It was really difficult to glean any real insights or to tell stories, and frankly, there was an absence of data because at the time they were moving from one enrollment CRM into another and effectively starting fresh. You can probably relate to this any one of these data challenges, depending on your role or your function or the kind of the state of things at your particular institution. And you may feel like you either have too much data or simply not enough. So we know that those of you in this session come from different size institutions, and we wanted to approach this from both sides, that you either have too much or you have too little data. So if you have too little, any system you use should be able to help you easily track some of these key data points that you see on the screen. Following industry or association benchmark funnel frameworks can be really helpful. In SOPA's case, because they are a school for continuing education, adult students, they offer bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, postgraduate certificates, those sorts of things. And in their case, they are, as a continuing education school, we tend to use UPCEA's funnel benchmark data, and it's proven really helpful in understanding not only what a funnel should look like, but how are we performing in comparison potentially to some of our peers. Having these basic measurements can help you tell the quantitative story and easily track things like your cost per inquiry, your cost per application, or cost per enrollment, and we'll talk more about those metrics in a little bit. But there are other areas even within the funnel to track. So SOPA in particular looks really closely at, for example, their completed to submitted applications, which is, in that step is where we require prospects to submit their transcripts. And as we've begun to look at the data, we've come to realize that can prove to be a barrier, and there might be ways in which we can support our prospects or our applicants to actually complete that step. Another being accepted to deposited. Once we instituted really small deposits to complete an application, we saw an increase in matriculation to enrolled. So all of this to say, we asked our registrants for some pre-survey data, and many of you, thank you for filling out our pre-training poll. But I wanted to share some of the insights with you because I think it really illustrates the importance of why this is such an important topic for us to dive into and to better understand. Just 20% of registrants indicated that they can clearly see or demonstrate the correlation between marketing and enrollment at their institution. That's a really small percentage, and that's something that we, as an organization, really want to help grow that number. A little over half actually understand marketing-specific metrics, but don't know how it impacts enrollment. Another really big leap that we'd like to see. And third was 28% have little to no insights about how their marketing efforts impact enrollment. So we're hoping that through today's session, we can actually help you, help close the gap on some of those responses and see if we can help you make some moves at your institution. So here's one straightforward way to visualize your funnel without really needing complicated or integrated back-end systems. Later, I am going to show you what a fully integrated dashboard can look like, but in the absence of those resources, you can use something as simple as Excel or Google Sheets to visualize and to better understand your prospect funnel. So most of you should be able to do this as long as you can access your numbers of inquiries and applications through to registration. What we do and what we started to do with Tulane SOPA, again, at the beginning of our relationship, there wasn't a whole lot of enhanced reporting in place, and so we found that we could take information from Slate, which is what they're using for inquiries and applications, and create this type of funnel visualization using Excel and Google Sheet visualization. And we began to look at it each month. After a while, it became clear that inquiries to started applications were causing a little bit of a headache. And what we found is that prospects often were not and are not, this continues to be a trend, are not inquiring within the same term in which they intend to apply. So for example, we might have someone inquire August 8th, and your application deadline is August 15th. And so the system would have bucketed that inquiry into that enrollment period, when in actuality what we were seeing is that most of the time people were inquiring about future terms for enrollment. So again, by looking at the data and having this accessible and continuing to look at it with the key team, we were able to identify that we needed to ask more questions of our inquiries. So what we began to do is we added a question to our inquiry forms Really simple, something of your anticipated term of enrollment. We give them a couple of upcoming options. Like in what term do you think you might actually be interested in enrolling? And then that helps us to map that inquiry to the right semester funnel so that we can better understand our pipeline. This also told us that we had a large number of self-applicants. If you look on this slide, you'll see there's the light blue, the second light blue bar, the first two rather. You have 91 ideal qualified inquiries, but we had 244 started applications. How could that really be? Well, it told us that prospects are entering our pipeline without ever having filled out an inquiry form. So that could mean that, maybe they're exposed to our advertising, maybe and they just never fill out a form to inquire, or they meet somebody or they're a referral from, faculty or a current student. But what else does it mean? It means that those people who just come in and start their application, they weren't getting our amazing email nurture campaigns for inquiries, which we had worked really hard on over the years to develop this really rich content, a series of 9 to 10 emails that an inquiry would receive over time. So once we realized that there were so many people coming in, just starting an application, and the only thing we had in place for those folks was a pretty boring application reminder email series, basically just kind of prompting them to complete their application. So it had this realization that, we could deliver to these prime prospects and much better content. And so we adjusted our drip campaigns based on this and created a new campaign for self-applicants where they're receiving, as soon as they enter the pipeline, through our application, some really great information. Now, on the flip side, you may have access to too much data. And if that's the case, you want to identify the KPIs that are most important to your institution and not just to marketing. So you see there I have a few different teams listed on the slide. And if you find yourself only in the marketing role, it's still valuable to ask the questions of the other teams, the program team, the enrollment services team, and even all the way up to administration. What we've found is that administration cares more about your cost metrics, like your cost per inquiry or your cost per enrollment, whereas your enrollment services team may be more interested in looking at the data around the performance of your email campaigns, for example, or how much are the students engaging with our emails or filling out an application or attending webinars, those sorts of things. So once you determine what's important to each and what the top indicators are for success, it's time to kind of step back and look at what jumps out as an anomaly. If you're running a certain type of ad or you tend to see very search heavy behavior, then what are the click-through rates looking like for those different types of ads? Are certain events performing better than others? So another little anecdote from Tulane SOPA is the program team is becoming really frustrated with the amount of time that they were putting in to host and to develop prospect webinars. And they felt like they were having a really low turnout. So we decided to take a deeper look at the data that we have and understand yield from attendance and from registration of our webinars. And this isn't a KPI that we would have really considered before as the marketing side. We wouldn't have really thought that deeply about that. But what we discovered is that students were just as likely to apply whether or not they actually attended the webinar. It was the act of registering for the webinar that was the real KPI that we needed to be concerned about. And we were able to better align all of the teams then from that point forward and help the program team understand that their time investment into these webinars was actually quite fruitful. So again, I'm going to provide a lot more anecdotes like this as we go. And really what I want to emphasize here is, this is a discovery that was actually driven by the client, and we love to see that. The data-driven mindset that they have been able to put in place and the continuous access and assessment of the analytics and the data really facilitated this conversation in the first place and helped them with that first key data challenge, which was breaking down the silos. So if you aren't sure where to begin with your marketing metrics, as we saw many folks felt in our pre-session survey, you should consider both your micro and your macro metrics. So micro metrics we tend to think about are going to speak more directly to those who work in marketing functions. They make the most sense on a campaign by campaign basis. How many impressions are we getting? What is the cost per click for this type of campaign? They're going to tell us how those specific efforts are performing, both with our audience and obviously in context with other efforts that you might run or other campaigns. Whereas your macro metrics are a little bit more business focused, they're going to truly demonstrate the performance of your marketing ultimately to your administration. So again, what we tend to see as your administrative teams tend to care about are cost per inquiries, cost per application enrollment, and ultimately what we really want to know is a return on investment. All right, so let's get into the big picture. For big picture reporting, for you to be able to take all of this micro and macro data and actually have a place to look at it at a high level, a few key things need to happen. First, we need to break down those silos that we talked about and communicate internally across teams. Hopefully some of those anecdotes that I already provided kind of illustrate the importance and the value that there can be once you do that. Second is understanding the journey to becoming a student, taking a step back and even sometimes doing some secret shopping of your own institution and others to see what does it take to actually become a student, but also what is that student's or that prospective student's data journey from first touch all the way through the enrollment and registration process at your school? Where do all of those potential touch points exist, and where is the data tracked around each of those touch points? Sometimes it is in disparate systems, but there are ways in which you can work to aggregate that information, assess it, and connect it. And then third, of course, is to determine how you can pull and connect all of that data together to look at the full picture. So the good news is there are a lot of tools out there that can support you with this. And while it might feel like quite the feat if you've got, 3 to 4 different systems in which you're running marketing efforts, or you're tracking data about your prospects, or even if you're working in one really comprehensive enrollment CRM like Slate, it's still difficult to understand, okay, how are we going to get all of this information out of it in a usable and accessible way? So I'm here to tell you that it can be done after probably about a year and a half to 2 years of really deep dive into understanding the data journey, understanding what data points we could get accessible from the platforms that we tend to work in, and really at the end of the day understanding, again, those metrics that matter to our key stakeholders. We were able to pull together an integrated dashboard. You could, of course, hire a team to do this, an expert team. There are experts out there who, do this for a living. Organizations like ours, this is something that we're beginning to do for all of our clients, actually, is to use data visualization tools for reporting. So what we were able to do is pull together using Google Data Studio, which, by the way, is a free tool. So I know a lot of times resources are a concern, but Google Data Studio is a free platform offered by Google, and it's the platform through which all of our data is now visualized and becomes accessible to both us and to the client. In the process of getting all of that data into Google Data Studio, we had to use some other integrations and tools like Supermetrics. We had to use Fivetran for data warehousing to make sure that we were able to access and display and visualize information. And we're pulling that data from Slate and then also from our marketing platforms. The ad tech platforms were actually running campaigns such as Facebook ads, Google Analytics, Google Ads. We are able to kind of access all of that data and get it into one place in Data Studio. And I'm going to show you what it actually looks like in real life. So the end result is that we have this integrated dashboard. It's updated in real time, and our client contacts Krista, again, who's the assistant dean over at Tulane SOPA. She can, on her own decide when and how she wants to look at this information. So in one place, we can see data from Slate about the status of applications and inquiries, while we can also contextualize that with deeper insights from platforms like Google Analytics, such as the location of our prospects, their demographics, or the ways in which people are coming to find our website online. Additionally, we can dig in and understand the performance of ads and marry together ad platform metrics like, okay, the clicks and impressions and the cost of these individual ads and campaigns with actual conversions that we care about from our enrollment CRM ultimately, which are inquiries and applications. And Krista, our contact, she uses this data quite frequently to prepare herself for stakeholder conversations, and she doesn't need to use up valuable marketing team hours or understand how to navigate the ad tech platforms in order to glean these insights. So all of that said, I know this might sound a little overwhelming, but this dashboard continues to be a work in progress. Our next project this year is to make our inquiry quality data more accessible and aggregate, and that's something that we're going to be tackling this upcoming year. So what I want to do next is show you a few of the data points that have really informed strategic decisions at Tulane SOPA. Data, again, that she's accessing through this dashboard that have been kind of gleaned deeper insights and strategic moves for the organization. So the first I'm going to talk about is organic. So this has to do with people coming to our website. How are they finding our website? What content are they consuming when they're there? In the pre-session survey, content was actually something that the majority of the team said, or the majority of our registrants said that they are using to attract prospective students. So first, we are looking at organic traffic, which you see at the top of the slide there. This is something we're measuring over time and always compared to the previous period. And that we were finding that there was a lot of opportunity within Tulane SOPA to expand their content strategy to get more organic visits. Of course, organic visibility is something that effectively is free. And so we wanted to really maximize that as much as possible through content production efforts and publication. It really greatly increased our organic site traffic with the added benefit of giving us insight into what people were actually interested in. So, for example, you'll see there on the slide on the table that one of the top viewed blogs bringing in organic traffic had to do with social media privacy issues during that period in 2020. This was like a huge hot topic. It was in the news constantly. And so how do we integrate that into our cybersecurity degree and course offerings? Can we integrate it further into our ad strategy? So Krista, in her position, is able to take these insights and think about both the program side and also the marketing side. We were also putting a lot of energy into really just search influence producing a lot of the content. And what Tulane SOPA really kind of came to realize is that they needed to actually supplement and increase their internal capacity for content production that really had to come from inside the school. So, for example, student stories and more about faculty. And so they decided to hire a marketing director with a really strong storytelling and writing background. And then from that, one of the key projects that new marketing director focused on was creating a news site. Again, to publish more of those internally generated news stories that, as an external partner, are always a little bit challenging for us to kind of tackle in real time. So next is another part of the dashboard that she tends to look at quite a lot, actually, is leads or inquiries by city and by campaign. The cities tells us, where do we have some brand recognition? Where do people know us? Where are people actually interested? And so we've used this information to inform where the recruitment team should actually be traveling. Where should they go be at conferences? Where should they be in person? Where should they go engage with alumni, for example, and to build those referral networks? And so it's also let us know where larger pockets of prospects are located so that we can then inform, again, our marketing strategy and be a little bit more targeted with our geographies. The campaigns help us know what's performing well. So, for instance, our brand awareness campaigns tend to garner the most leads by far, but we also know that we're spending the most on those campaigns. What was more interesting is that our military and veterans campaigns generate some of the top volume of inquiries out of all of our campaigns, yet we don't dedicate a huge amount of spend to it, telling us that there's a demand there. We have some unique selling propositions to get in front of that audience. So this is an example of how the data has helped us make strategic decisions that improved the efficiency and influenced actions of non-marketing team members at Tulane SOPA. So next is creative and messaging. Looking at our top performing ads by the amount of inquiries they've generated really helped us see that our ads that were using real photos as opposed to illustrations were getting more traction. They were getting more impressions, more inquiries. We had better click-through rates. Effectively across the board, those micrometrics looked a lot better for our actual photography ad assets. So this helped us see that while we loved the graphical ads and thought that it helped us stand out, they just still weren't performing well and resonating as well with our audiences as we thought they might. And so in the upcoming year, we're actually making a whole creative shift and moving back to photos. And it helped us see what programs were performing well related to ads and spend. This is also one section of the dashboard where we can compare to applications for these programs and see if or where there is a discrepancy between inquiries and ads. The most important takeaway that we really want you to have here is to use all of this data. There's so much of it, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, but if you take the time to really assess it, it can really help you make concrete decisions. In order to make those decisions, marketing, recruitment, enrollment, student services all really need to be working together to share data. Although marketing is on the front lines of reaching prospects, what we've found that we really need and where we've gotten a lot of value is when we get feedback from recruitment and student services that can inform our tactics and our strategies. So for example, recruitment can tell us where we're losing and where we keep students in the funnel. We then need to use that to reevaluate our target audiences, for example, in advertising. We use it to create new campaigns or to adjust our marketing strategies. And to highlight, this also highlighted an issue with lead scoring that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes to give y'all another anecdote there. Student services can also feed into marketing really some of the most valuable insights, which are student stories or stories of students who persist. They do that. They can collect that through student surveys or other forms. But we know that actual student stories and testimonials are a big part of what speaks to and resonates with our audience. And so we won't know that information as a marketing team, right, unless we're getting that from student services. And so this is a way in which we can really, again, fuel that cycle and keep things moving so that we are ultimately growing enrollment. Okay, I mentioned that something that recruitment helped to illustrate for us was that we had an issue with lead scoring. So here's an example, again, of working really closely with the recruitment enrollment services team, breaking down those silos and understanding the data. In 2017, when we started with Tulane SOPA, they were moving into Slate and effectively starting from the ground up in terms of data tracking. So there really was effectively no lead scoring in place. And so we implemented at the time a pretty rudimentary lead score process, which you can kind of see the definitions here on the screen of how we defined a qualified lead and who was unqualified. And so over time, as we measured our performance of campaigns and we were monitoring the percent of qualified leads, we felt really good that we were getting these great inquiries, but the recruitment team was telling us a different story and something wasn't lining up. So we took the time together to dig in and to understand this a little better because we knew that it was important not to waste recruitment's time, and we wanted to have a real accurate view of our cost per inquiry anyway. So we ultimately took a step back from what we were doing, and hearing that this wasn't quite right, we reassessed. So this is where we are now. We, again, really had to work closely together for this to work. But now what we're doing, instead of these very rigid definitions around what makes a qualified inquiry and what makes an unqualified inquiry, we are using a combination of automated technology within Slate and TextMagic, and then actual people time. So the recruitment team having the ability to actually mark quality within their leads. So once an inquiry is submitted, we use TextMagic within Slate to perform an automated phone and email validity check. Right off the bat, if that prospect didn't provide us a valid phone or email address, they're immediately marked as unqualified, which really makes sure that we're not wasting any energy or effort on spam, on bots, or on people who really just aren't serious and are providing fake contact information, which quite frankly is going to happen when you run digital advertising. Next, we further qualify those who are qualified, who did provide good contact information, by checking over time to see if they have taken any number of actions that demonstrate that they are interested. So again, we worked with the recruitment team to understand, of your prospects that you're speaking to, tell us about the best engaged students. Who's your ideal student? What are the actions they're taking? They might be registering for a webinar. They're responding to a text from the admissions team, or they're picking up the phone when they call them. And we defined a list of what these demonstrated interest actions could be. And so what we then monitor with the Slate to see if a prospect who gave us good contact information continues to take those actions, then we mark them as ideal qualified. And they'll remain that way until, we get some other information about them that might, disqualify them if that's the case. And again, all of that is fed back to our marketing teams and used to understand our student funnels by enrollment, and helps us to quantify really how are our campaigns actually doing. We might have all of these, a high volume of inquiries, but if we find that a given campaign is only producing a small amount of ideal qualified, then that means we need to dig in to performance. So again, this serves as an example of ways to break down the silos and explore communication, and then to use the systems that you have to better map and understand your prospect's behavior and journey. And again, with this school, at the time that we started, there really was no data in place. And so what I would encourage is, in the absence of data, you have to start somewhere. So even what we looked at on the previous slide, what we came to find out, it wasn't quite working and it wasn't great. But what we did was, once we had some data, we were able to iterate and make improvements. And all of this, one of the key things I want you to understand and think about is that all of this is a continuous improvement mindset and process that you're going to have to adopt and move forward with. So key takeaways from today, a few key messages I want to make sure we get across, and then we will have a couple of minutes left for Q&A. First is that data tracking through the funnel can produce both quantitative and qualitative insights. So while you might think it's just going to give you a bunch of numbers and I'm not really sure how I'm going to use that, again, I hope that some of those anecdotes around taking a look at the data and then digging in to understand or seeing, okay, well, what does this tell us about where we should travel? What does this tell us about who's interested, and maybe where we need to have a presence both digitally and in person? Second are that tools and platforms are available for aggregating your disparate data sources. Again, what I mentioned was Google Data Studio. There are some other off-the-shelf sort of more packaged services that you can purchase that are similar to Data Studio. There's one called DataBox, for example, that may be able to work with you to integrate into some of your systems. We found that Data Studio gave us a little bit more direct control, and so that's one of the reasons that we chose it. But again, using a tool to help you gather, get better access to, and then visualize your data in ways that are useful is ultimately going to help you better understand your prospects and your pipelines and your funnels. Third is follow the prospect and seek to understand their behavior through the funnel, and make sure that those insights are being fed back to marketing and admissions. That cycle, that sort of circle graphic that we took a look at, it's a continuous cycle. There needs to be continuous communication and feedback in order for you to see a continued fuel for your enrollment growth. And last is to use data to tell compelling data-backed stories when presenting to your program partners, leaders, and decision makers. All right. And with that, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I know that Shira has been kind of monitoring and also has a few questions that were submitted from the pre-webinar survey.
Hey everybody, I'm going to share with you some of the questions that we got in the pre-webinar survey. But while we do this, please feel free to input your questions into the question box or into the chat. The first question we got is, how does a dashboard like this help prove ROI?
That's a great question. Let's see. So proving ROI can be a little bit difficult. It can be tricky, to be honest. In our dashboards, what we tend to track are metrics like costs, how much are we spending on our different campaigns, and understanding our funnels. Again, all of which are kind of like the key inputs that you're going to need in order to come to an ROI. In Tulane SOPA's dashboard in particular, we don't currently have an actual full ROI calculation within the dashboard, and that's really because the client owns, they're the keeper of the revenue data, right? And that's ultimately what we would love to see is the revenue data per term in order to calculate an ROI based on marketing investment. However, periodically we do work together to calculate that ROI. So the simplest way to determine it is to understand your marketing costs for a given period or for a given term, and then compare that with the tuition and run an ROI calculation in that way. What I would suggest is consider looking at all marketing spend compared to all tuition, and then there may be ways that you can break it down by degree. If we're spending, or we have a total budget allocation for this master's program of this much for the year and so forth, you can get a little bit deeper there and compare to your tuition by degree or by program. We do have an ROI white paper that is going to be coming out really soon. Goes into 3 models for calculating ROI. And so if you registered for this session, you'll receive an email to download that when it's ready. I think it'll be coming up in the next week.
The other question that we have is, how do I use this data to frame our marketing success to senior leadership?
Wow, that's a great question. I'll share a few thoughts that come to mind with you, but note that in our next session, and I'll show you next what's coming up, but in our next session, we're actually going to talk all about how to present marketing strategies and build trust with stakeholders. So we'll go into more depth, but I want to give you a few of my initial thoughts now. I recommend always positioning your marketing efforts as a part of recruitment. It might seem like semantics, but what we found is that everyone kind of understands, or when I say everyone, I mean within an institution. A lot of times in the higher ed space, there's a good understanding of the need and the value of recruiting new students, right? Of course, that has to happen in order for the school to have new students each term. But marketing often gets like a negative connotation or a negative response because I think it's because there's elements to it that people just don't understand, or they think, digital marketing might seem untrustworthy to them, or, it's just kind of new territory. And so it tends to be seen almost with this negative connotation, whereas everybody gets and understands recruitment, right? So I would consider framing, making sure when you speak about your marketing efforts that you actually use the words recruiting and you're actually talking about how that fuels recruitment. So consider how you might adapt your marketing metric vocabulary to higher education vocabulary. So it seems very simple, and again, back to kind of semantics, but instead of reporting or talking about how many clicks you got from a campaign, you might want to reframe it. Like if that's something you're proud of and you want to share that insight, you might reframe that to talk about how many prospective students viewed your landing page, viewed this great content about this program. People within higher ed tend to kind of connect a little bit better when you speak about it in that way. And I think it's going to depend on the stakeholders within each institution. At Tulane SOPA, I know that they have a really great dean who's kind of committed to learning a little bit more about marketing because she knows how important it is and how much it fuels recruitment. And I would say, the more that you can encourage that behavior, the better. But again, we also would recommend to focus on the stories and the anecdotes that you have, much like the ones that I gave today throughout the presentation, of how you've been able to use your data or how your campaigns have fueled efficiencies or changed a strategy or gave you a really good insight into your prospect. And we find that that those stories tend to be very compelling to administration, and that we get really good responses when we're able to frame things and talk about them in that way, as opposed to just talking about clicks and impressions and kind of the basic marketing metrics that a lot of people don't understand. Sure, any other questions? for today's session?
No, that's all we have.
Awesome. All right. Well, to just wrap us up, and I hopefully actually getting y'all out a little bit early today so you can get back to your priorities for the day. We really look forward to seeing you at the next session, which is scheduled for January 11th. At the end of this, when I end the webinar, there will be a 3-question, super quick survey that we would really appreciate you filling out. It would help us to improve and help us to know how much value you got from today's presentation. So again, see you on January 11th. And thank you. And we really appreciate you coming and hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.